Let's do the news. Last night, Joe Biden's convention speech. We talked about it on the show, but I want to talk about it a little bit more. And I want to be a little bit directed at who I'm aiming this at. Basically, lefties or Democrats that are somewhat forlorn or somewhat independents that are looking at this and that are kind of trying to process what they saw in regards to that speech in a context to the world to which they are currently in. I don't have any clips of that speech to show you. I don't have clips of the speech to show you because all of the speech was basically vacuous and inert. It was feeling and pageantry, and at times, honestly, somewhat insulting. Joe Biden basically gave a vague a vague speech that tokenized his son, his dead son, Floyd's death, civil rights, even economic and poverty and income inequality, all of which Joe Biden and that party was intrinsically linked and culpable to creating. Think about it for the moment, bringing on Floyd's son when Joe Biden was infinitely responsible for the crime bill and the mean-spiritedness, and you can even make an argument of racist intent that was in that justice system in the first place, coming from the top in regards to the laws that Joe Biden helped pass, and bringing Floyd's on the economic inequality, serving in an administration where he himself and Obama, the person that he's rubbing himself in, 95% of the income to the top 1%. Honestly, if you were trying to do that, that would be a feat to do. But Obama was able to pull that off. Income gains to the top 1%, leaving 5% basically for everybody else. Out of all of the people who are in this country working, 42%, nearly 50%, bringing home $18,000 a year. And they consider that poverty, and they intentionally keep that number that low because they don't want to go with a real poverty level that is higher than that, and it's probably 50% and over. Joe Biden helped create those systems, trying to cut Social Security, trying to cut Medicare. This is who he is. Don't take me. Look back at his record. Civil rights. In the 80s, Joe Biden dropped out of the campaign for lying about plagiarizing speeches and, lying about civil rights, saying that he was a part of something that he had to admit that he was not a part of. And yet, he will talk about civil rights here, act like he was out there doing movie theaters. Lies that the press don't necessarily seem to care about. Lies that the other candidates didn't necessarily seem to care about. That I found greatly insulting and offensive. And something that he had to apologize for in the 80s. And now he's back with this notion that he's the guy that was pushing for civil rights. He's the black candidate. And so when I point to the speech, and I like, how are you tokenizing and using your dead son as a prop for healthcare when you've admitted that you're not even pushing for a public option? That public option stuff is off the table now. You're going to get incrementalism in regards to maybe tweaks to Obamacare. That is what you're going to get. A person who is impacted by a dead son or relative that got ill wants everybody to have healthcare. I'm telling you this from my own point of view. Having to deal with healthcare, having to deal with the bills, having to deal with the poverty of it all. And you get to this particular situation where the Democrat that's running is using that feeling, that impetus, in order to try to get people to implicitly believe that he's going to do something about that, and he's severe about that. Medicare for all is what 88% of Democrats want. And yet, despite the fact he had a dead son, apparently that dead son wasn't enough for him to ensure and care that each and every American was covered. Don't use these things as props. I find this is somewhat insulting that at the time where we have all of these crises that besiege this country, and he would even enunciate the crisis, but the vacuous, inert gas of a speech that Joe Biden put out there in no way gives any notion of that stuff. Trump sucks, and I am going to be Joe Biden when I get Trump out of office. That is what I offer you. Now, there's certain parts of that speech that we need to talk about. That part is just the beginning of it. I am going to be Joe Biden when I remove Trump out of office is probably the honest theme of that particular speech. It wasn't about policy. It was these vague feeling tones that people subjectively paint in their heads when they're sitting at home. He knows this. It's like Hope and Change or Poor Man's Hope and Change. That's what the speech was. In the midst of a crisis of this country, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's people not having jobs, whether it's people in the food lines, well, all those things. When FDR took office, he looked at our country and said, we are under siege. And I'm going to behave as if we are under siege to ameliorate these concerns and these problems. Did Joe Biden do that in that speech? Fuck no. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, like, share, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you for allowing me to do so. We're trying to get back to normal in regards to contributor appreciation and everything else. I've said this before. The surgery last week, there's going to have to be another one coming up because the first one didn't necessarily do what we thought it was going to do. But give me a week or two, and we'll be back to normal in regards to the number of videos and in regards to contributor appreciation. I repeat that because I'm sorry that I had to stop that, or at the very least, it was interceded by real life. But give me time. One of the lies that is intractable to what it is to be America, and that is often repeated, and not just often repeated, often drilled in and screamed by media as being somehow legit. The media and political class loved Joe Biden's speech, this vacuous, inert gas of a speech. But they loved the speech for the exact same reason that lefties hated it. Lefties have a tendency to be policy wonks. We look at the world and we say, how do we ameliorate those concerns? The political class and the media class basically just want to get back to status quo. Where was it when we were the most comfortable? And where was it where we were still making the bucks? That was back in the Obama, the Reagan, even to some degree the Bush era. And that is what we need to go back to. Donald Trump is freaking us out. And so when the media looks at the speech that Joe Biden gave, and when the oligarchs or when the political class looks at the speech, they say, that's a pretty good speech. Why? Because it doesn't necessarily address any of the main issues. And in going back to what it was, where 42% of the public was making $18,000 a year, that doesn't affect them at all. They're millionaires. All of them are rich. The people who are paying their salaries are rich. The people who are giving money to politicians are rich. 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. Who do you think that politician is going to lean towards? Incentivized to lean towards, no less. The rich. Meaning, from the standpoint of a media, these talking heads that are fabulously wealthy and that Donald Trump freaks them out and they want to go back to an old status quo where they can continue to be wealthy without Donald Trump freaking them out. From a standpoint of an oligarch class, especially a class that pays the Democratic Party and all of these Republicans that are, all of these people are just rich. They love him because he gets them back to status quo. We hate them because it gets them back to status quo. And that speech signaled exactly that. So when you have Van Jones say, oh, I love that speech. Or when you have even Chris Wallace, I love that speech. We want to get back to status quo. Donald Trump freaks us out. That has nothing to do with you, your concerns, the economic difficulties, the health disparities and difficulties. None of that stuff was addressed. How do you ignore that stuff? How do you give thought and tones to those things as opposed to directly addressing those things? You can make an argument that Trump is grotesque. That's true. But what does it have to do with you? And what does it have to do with you dealing with those problems? It's a hostage speech to some degree. You will accept me as Biden or you will stay with Trump. That is all I have to say. And you walk off stage. Basically, you have nowhere else to go. This is mano a mano. All of that policy stuff that I said in the primary is off the table. You're not even going to remember it. No, this is a contest now between Trump and I. I don't have to offer you anything about policy because this is a mano a mano contest and that guy's over there drowning. So you accept me or you don't. This has nothing to do about policy. This is everything to do with me just going back to status quo. Lefties bristle at that. The Republicans that they have walking across the stage while still expecting your vote, leaving, Tulsi Gabbard off that stage, leaving, what's her name, AOC, giving a full speech, even to some degree leaving Julian Castro off in lieu of all of these Republicans. I understand the politics. Joe Biden is basically playing politics. Again, not an affirmative way of getting in office, but basically a strategic way of getting in office. Donald Trump is drowning. Whether it's the economic crisis, whether that's the inability to bring jobs from overseas, whether that's foreign policy failures, whether that's on the people marching and protesting in the streets, whether that's 170 something thousand dead or the 200 or more thousand that will be dead by the time we get to the election. All of those things are failures, and all of those things are in the news daily. Joe Biden has made a choice to, I'm not going to invoke myself into any of that. Let him drown, and let the people make a choice between the man that's drowning versus me. And that, up to this point, has been what he's pushed for. I mean, why do you think that they say, Donald Trump argues, oh, you're going to have all of these people in the streets and they're going to destroy these countries and they're going to abolish the cops? Joe Biden, editor of the crime bill, and Kamala Harris, top cop, somehow undermines that particular argument that this is going to be a defund the police administration. You can go further. This argument that they're controlled by the radical right. And then you have all of these Republicans marching on that stage, even taking a swipe, Republican, at the DNC convention, taking a swipe at AOC, somebody who's supposed to be a Democrat. How does it follow that he's controlled by the radical left when you have all of these right-wingers on stage saying, yeah, the Democratic Party has become a comfortable home for us because they've moved so far to the right over the course of the last several years? The expectation is that lefties, even with that middle finger, will vote for them because they are so broken and disgruntled that they have nowhere else to go. And so despite taking a shower after that vote, they're still getting that vote. But there's no shower that can be factored into the vote. The vote is a thing unto itself. You do that alone. His point is, and the Democrats' point is, we understand that you had a socialist in that race that looked like at one point he was going to win. But to make it that much more emphatically clear that you are not the power brokers of this, we will, march these Republicans off. We won't bring any lefties on to try to make that pitch and make that point. And when Joe Biden gives that speech, any notion of honest policy dealing to the left, out the window. If you're going to make an argument at this point, after listening to that speech and after seeing the convention, that Joe Biden can be pushed to the left, you are gaslighting at best and lying at worse. You have no leverage in this process. Your only leverage is basically being willing to let him lose. And that has not been a bridge that you've been willing to go. And as such, that has been the thing, the chain, the link, the thing that has been able to restrain how you behave. Even Sanders. Even when they stick their thumb in your eye or piss in your cereal. Think about what happened in 2016. They cheated Sanders. People know that. They understood that. And yet, when it came down to voting for Clinton, they still did it. Think about what that means. Think about how broken of a person you have to be in order to say, I know they cheated my guy, but I'm still going to vote for 2020. They call you sexist, racist, bigoted. They eliminated any notion that you had some kind of color, called you the white candidate, all of that stuff, and acted as if you were uniquely evil. Elizabeth Warren comes out and attacks Sanders and the people supporting Sanders. And then all of a sudden they want your vote. What are you to do with that? Where's your dignity in this process? Where's your pride? Where's this notion that you have some level of self-worth where you're not just a battered lefty, you're also somebody who gets politically astute and starts to make decisions in regard to what you're willing to accept and not willing to accept, not based in this notion of fear, but based in this notion of what needs to happen, cause and effect in regards to this country being something different. And is there anything that you can do right now to push that while Joe Biden is running, not giving a shit about you? Just to be very clear, he doesn't give a shit about you or for that matter the black vote because he have you locked. If he did not have you locked, those would be people he would be more likely to pander to. It is the reason, in part, that he's pandering to Republicans right now. He believes that the left, and for the most part Democrats, are locked based on the fear of Trump. So yeah, he could expand outward. And no, he doesn't necessarily have to appropriate any of those lefty policies that you were fighting with him in the primary, because at this point, you don't matter. Mano a mano. These are rational actions. I hope you understand me for how horrid they are from a perspective of a public that wants its political device to attend to its needs. It is a rational action of the person, of the individual that is involved in that contest to behave in this way if he does not have anything to offer. And the only thing that he can offer is, I'm not Trump. That was your speech. That was your convention. That is the current Democratic Party. And that is why the left is always marginalized and ignored. Because you basically incentivize them to marginalize and ignore you. Stop being bullied by this nonsense. Appropriate who you are. Are you a Democrat, or are you somebody who cares about these policies that the Democratic Party don't care about? And if you are somebody who cares about these policies and you realize that the party doesn't care about it, why do you continue to support the party? Understand, you make the argument that Trump is grotesque, but look at your political system over the course of the last 40 years. You have slid, your party has moved fervently to the right. And that is part and parcel to the exact reason of you have nowhere else to go, which tries to make an argument to eliminate any notion of accountability from the political process. Your argument of, well, you got to vote Biden because Trump is horrible is the exact same argument that was made going for the last 40 years for particularly any Republican, followed by least worse. And as your party took all sorts of cash, and as your party slid to the right, again, rational because it has to take positions and point of view that is in line with the people who are giving them that cash because they believe cash is the way to win the match, they would argue to you that least worse, no accountability, and you would say, okay. And as it moved further and further to the right, any notion of accountability in the political process in regards to the policies that you want and that you believe the public wants, out the window. And instead, the focus become identity. Because identity is personal and intrinsic to who people are. And if they feel like something is attacking that identity, then you can get those votes without having to have an economic component to it. Something that, frankly, is infinitely more important. We are not the United States. We are not. That has been a lie that has been put forth from the very beginning. This notion of forced unity. This is an obvious lie. You have people proclaiming freedom and justice while they were holding human beings in bondage and servitude. Vicious bondage and servitude. Fascist state screaming about freedom and justice. You have this other thing where they would go out and say, we are the light of the world, we're freedom and justice also. And from a standpoint of an international standpoint. And we believe in international law, we believe in human rights, etc. While simultaneously sending kill squads and death squads to South America to topple governments. Or for that matter, even in our modern times, we would argue we believe in human pursuits. And we would destroy Libya, Syria, all of these countries, Afghanistan, Iraq. And the media space says nothing. Meaning, when the New York Times is printing stories that we are sending terrorists into Libya or into Syria in order to destabilize and destroy those countries, do you realize 500 people died in the Syria war, the civil war that we were pushing, again, kill squads, thugs, people with long beards and thick necks going around raping and killing people with an invisible U.S. flag taped on their lapels. This is us. This is an honest portrayal of us. I haven't said anything that's wrong here. And yet, if Jake Tapper or if the media space was hit with any of this, they would recoil. They don't want to touch it, which means there's an implicit dishonesty even in the very basis of acting. The lie that I am talking about, though, is united. We are not a United States. How do you have Joe Biden talking to a bunch of oligarchs, telling them that, look, our paradigm will go back to normal and nothing is going to fundamentally change? And yet he would come out and give a vacuous speech to give a signal to those people that, hey, maybe Joe Biden is right. Nothing is going to change because that vacuous speech didn't have really anything in it. Nothing material anyway. You have people who, 30 million people out of a job. And you have the people who were in that room with Joe Biden doing monstrously well. How are we united in this context? With all of these people that are dying, with all of these people that are dirt poor. And you're going back to the status quo was basically letting homeowners go bust and giving a ton of money to billionaire class. Maybe I don't want to go back to status quo. Maybe, to me, if it's status quo and torching it, I'd rather torch it. Maybe to me, my support of Medicare for all and the belief that with 88% of other Democrats supporting me, you have no just cause in the middle of a pandemic with all of these people losing their health care to not appropriate and push for that policy. So I look at this and say, no, I am not going to support a party that is not going to back the interest that I think is in my interest. And understand, I'm not the extremist on this. They are. When I make the point to you that the information and the perspectives that you're getting is basically of the oligarch class, why do you think I make that point? It's obvious why you would want to be considered the moderate. Now, because by definition, if you are the moderate, the middle, then everything else around you, relation-wise, is radical or extreme. But Joe Biden, the Republican Party, these are the extremes of our country. And when the media is giving you this notion of moderate, what they're talking about is moderate in the context of an oligarchy. Meaning those people who are rich, the people with means, the people who make the decisions by giving those politicians cash in order to get those politicians the point of view. Those people have a point of view of the world. And the politicians that are in Congress that are pushing for those ends, well, what's extreme, what's radical, and what's on the other side of this, and what's moderate? From their perspective, if you get Joe Biden back in, it goes back to the status quo. That guy's moderate. The radicals in this are the people who, are poor. Well, the problem with this is, with that narrative that the media picks up constantly, is that 72% of the public, American public, would like to expand Social Security. 69% want Medicare for all. 67% want a $15 minimum wage. 67% want to legalize marijuana. 64% want taxes on extreme wealth. 63% want a Green New Deal. 58% want to cancel all student debt and get rid of and make college and universities free. The Democratic Party is not for any of those things, nor is the Republican Party. That is the center of your country. Real terms, honest, real terms. That right there. That is what people want. If you go to people and say, what do you want? This is what I want. This will make our life better. This will make our country better. The Democratic Party is not for those things. The Republican Party is not for those things, meaning you have two parties that are extreme and radical with a media space that is also filthy rich and will argue that the positions that they're taking are moderate. They may be moderate in their terms, because if you are a millionaire, you're not overly concerned about your kids going to school. You can afford that. You're not overly concerned about your health care. You can afford that. You're not overly concerned about financial matters that may utterly destroy you, like a parking ticket if you're poor, or a speeding ticket, again, if you are poor, or for that matter, an expense where your child needs to go somewhere if you're poor. Those things are disasters when you have very little income. But these are not the ideas, the points of view, the problems that are put on evening news, because those guys are millionaires. And when they're trying to make a choice on what to talk about in the news, it is going to be something that is not in any way going to disrupt their gravy train. They may even not even look at it in those terms. It may just be honest terms of these are the things we care about, in lieu of those other vagaries of our country where people are in utter destitution. They hated Sanders so much because Sanders was willing to talk about that and point that out. That was his point of view of the world. And that had to be utterly destroyed, which is why the entirety of the party voted in order to crush him. What I'm trying to tell you is that regardless of what media is telling you is moderate, what media is telling you is moderate for them. That has nothing to do with the perspective of the American public. It's for them. Biden is an extremist. He's a partisan, every bit as much as Trump. And if you're looking at the policies that he's putting forth, the moderation that he's talking about is vastly out of sync of what the American public wanted. And for that matter, what they needed, especially in the context of being in the middle of a crisis. That speech was tone deaf. Millions of people are out of work. Hundreds of thousands at food banks. The 70-year-old woman waiting in line in the New York Times was heartbreaking. But she's there. And that was something that was put up and created by Obama, by Clinton, by Bush, and yeah, by people like Joe Biden. And now they want you to put him back in because they want to do something about it. It's obvious why forced unity is made as an argument. The stronger party of this basically wants the weaker party to submit itself to whatever it is that the stronger party is pushing. with the notion that if we can convince you that we are somehow together, then maybe your issues, the things that you care about, the things that plague you and bother you, maybe we can stop you from talking about those things, or at the very least stop you from pushing for those things under this guise of unity. The problem is we're not united. If that guy can't pay his rent next month and this other guy is going to make $1 billion, that's not united. And pretending as if is flagrantly a lie. If you were telling me that, hey, we're going to now get to integration and blacks have been in this country for 400 years, I'm going to say that's a lie. There's certain lies that are implicit or just that perpetuate themselves, either in our media or in the way we talk about it. And the reason is very obvious. Media does that, again, because media wants to control the narrative. It is easier to try to get you to believe something as opposed to trying to beat you over the head about it. If they're telling you, oh, this is the moderate, and here are the positions that these guys have, and they're making you think that whatever Joe Biden is talking about or whatever Trump is talking about is some kind of political spectrum. Well, again, all of this is done from the standpoint of this is the best that you can get. Here are the extremes of thought in your political space and in your country. And despite the fact that, again, what these guys are pushing for is not what the American public wants. They are the extremists. And Joe Biden has you, to some degree, hostage, making a basic argument that you can accept me or take Trump. No, I'm not for any of that stuff. Still, you can accept me or take Trump. And the idea that you are held hostage with the Trump gun in a similar way that Clinton was trying to hold the country hostage with the Trump gun is utterly and patently insulting. We can do better. And frankly, if the lefties, even if they lost, had cobbled themselves together, all of these progressive groups, and basically said one thing: you won't get our vote, you will not get our support unless you support an American agenda, starting with Medicare for all and an actual Green New Deal. And you give your demands, and Joe Biden either accepts or rejects those demands. And ideally, he either wins or loses as such. That is the only clout, that is the only leverage that you have in this political space. And I hate to tell you this, the fact is, in the 2020 election, when it looked like Bernie Sanders was going to run away with it, and Chuck Todd asked an extraordinarily good question: if Bernie Sanders gets most votes at the end of this, and he has more delegates, will you give him the win or will you take it to a brokered convention? Each and every one said we'd rip it from his hands at a brokered convention, which means that that entire party had already made the point that beating Sanders is more important than beating Trump. And we are willing to tank it, because that is literally what would have taken place if they would have ripped that nomination from Sanders at a brokered convention. They would have lost. They know they would have lost. But it was more important to stop Sanders from changing the party for a generation than it was to beat Trump. We're not on the same side in this party. You've added oligarchs and you've added workers to basically the same party, believing somehow that their interest is somehow shared. And what is patently obvious is that over the last 40 years, that cash has been far more important than those workers in regards to policy and ideas that have been put forth in regards to what the Democratic Party, where it will go. That, what I've just shown you, the Social Security, Medicare, all that stuff, is America's agenda. Who is Joe Biden working for? What agenda and whose agenda is Joe Biden pushing if Joe Biden is not pushing for the things that the American public wants? It was clear they want it when he lost the policy arguments in the primary. It's clear they want it now in the midst of all of these traumas to the country. Who is Joe Biden fighting for if it is not what the American public wants? And I'll end it on that. I mean, I don't want to entirely beat a dead horse on this. I'm just making the point that from the standpoint of the left, your ability to intercede and to have any weight and leverage in the political space is entirely related to whether or not you're willing to go along to get along, which basically incentivizes them taking advantage of you, or whether you're willing to say, enough. This country is in trauma. Enough. This is what the country wants. And until you acquiesce to this as a party, you don't get our support. If that means you lose, you lose. But understand, you are losing because you are so partisan, so purist, that you are not willing to acquiesce and accept policy that the overwhelming majority of the American public supports. And for that matter, your party. Meaning, you lost, not because those people should have voted for you, but you lost because you weren't willing to go get their votes. And going getting their votes was basically representing the interests of the American public. You lost because you guys are purists and because you guys are representing something that is not in line with the American public. That's why you lost. It was only your fault. Those people didn't vote for you. Those people don't have to vote for you. It's not their responsibility to vote for you. It is your responsibility to get their vote by enunciating, by pushing for policy that will bring this country together and that will organically unite the people to vote for you. But that's not what you're doing. Trump's bad. That's all I need. And I'm making the point that that is unacceptable. And that should be unacceptable to all of these lefties that actually realize we're in a traumatic moment that needs to be dealt with. Do you honestly believe that milquetoast Joe Biden, I offer you nothing, but you need to give me everything, and Trump is uniquely horrible and bad, and he did everything wrong that ruined this country for the last 3 years? Do you buy that argument? And why would you buy that argument? And if you have real things that you want to get accomplished, say, for example, Medicare for all with 88% support, if the party and Joe Biden says, yeah, you guys should kick rocks, and loses without acquiescing and accepting Medicare for all, then all sorts of hell should be dumped on him and the Democratic Party for not backing a policy that has 88% support, 70% support outside of the party, and in the middle of a pandemic with 20 million people that lost their health care. Not to mention the 20 million that didn't have it already. If the Democratic Party and Joe Biden is willing to tank it all instead of acquiescing and accepting a policy with 88% support, then all sorts of hell should be raised on Joe Biden and the Democratic Party for that. Because that loss would be entirely on them. As it was absolutely and infinitely clear that those people said, you either support our policy or you lose. If tens of millions of people did that, you would start to develop political leverage, political clout, and you could start being something where you can not necessarily just be the battered wife of the political spouse. You would actually gain a certain degree of credibility in your political affairs with the weight that you could put behind an issue or not, and your ability to force and leverage a political space or not. Until you're willing to do that, nothing changes. Biden can give the most vacuous speech in the world. Biden can say, I'm going to privatize Social Security. Biden can say, I'm going to get rid of the mail service. He can do all that stuff. And he would say, I'm not Trump, though. I'm least worse. Give me your vote. And I would give you, Sam Cedar will be out there telling you must vote for Joe Biden for president, despite the fact that Joe Biden offers nothing. And, this is not the way politics works. And I'm sorry, Bernie Sanders has taught politics wrong for the last several years. Politics is a negotiation at best. These are no negotiations here. This is just basically vacuousness back to status quo. And I'm going to get my donors and those people who have wealth, they're going to love it when we get back to normal. The people who have been hurt, the people who are already poor, those people, they'll love it because of Joe Biden and I'm not Trump. I'll end it here. I don't want to, go into repetition. Like, share, and subscribe. This video has gone monstrously long. Pop reality. Trump needs to win for progressives to have even one last shot to save the planet and working people in 2024. It's time leftists admit this reality. Pop, I can't entirely say you're wrong. A Joe Biden winning on this would basically legitimize and give all sorts of latitude to the notion that all people wanted was status quo, when that could be further, nothing could be further from the truth. And yeah, I'm almost inclined to believe you're right. Trump breaking the Democratic Party allows the secondary argument that the status quo has failed again, and there's something that fundamentally needs to change with the party. Agreed. Wesley Walker. What Bob means to say is Jamarl Thomas 2024. I'm not running for anything. Time to roll up those sleeves. Bob Ramirez. Yeah. Do the work of a man. Do the work of a man. Ain't that right, Bob? Nuna Beeswax. None Beeswax. It's amazing how strong Stockholm Syndrome has held Democratic voters. Is there even a breaking point that exists for this group of people? Well, here's the problem. This group of people are tens of millions of lefties. Consider it for the moment. You had more lefties to vote for Hillary Clinton that were Sanders supporters than you did have Hillary Clinton supporters vote for Obama. And lefties would fall in line. Like, they don't understand. You can complain all you want about being to take advantage of. You can complain all you want that these guys aren't backing policies that the American public want. But if you don't have leverage, if you don't have some way of influencing, then your opinion doesn't matter. You are a captive audience. And because of such, you can be taken for granted. You can be marginalized. You can be ignored. You can be talked down to. You can be talked at. All of those things take place when you are basically along for the ride without any power in the process. But lefties accept that position. Not just accept it, they're used to it. And until they get to the point of saying, I'm done, and I'm done in mass, where tens of millions of people leave, nothing happens. You will continue to get a Joe Biden. And you will continue to get status quo, where year after year people suffer, people die, people scramble, not because they have to, but because of a political instrument, left and right, that's representing the interests of the people that are paying them. Meaning, keep this system as it is because it is a system that has enriched me. And we need to go back to a little bit of normality or status quo. So, yeah, get Trump out of office and Biden. Look, Bob, I'm almost to the point of agreeing with you. And I definitely agree with Pop. It almost takes a loss for any of this to change. I'll leave it here because this video has gone monstrously long. Like, share, and of course, subscribe.